Every New Mexican deserves to understand how the law works for them, or why it doesn't work for them. Welcome to New Mexico Legal Lowdown, hosted by attorney Feliz Rael. Each episode, we will help demystify the legal system and uncover misconceptions through real conversations with New Mexico trial lawyers. Produced and powered by LawPods.
This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our La Justicia Circle supporters, Singleton Schreiber, Nick Rowley, Lori Benko, Sherry LaCour, and McGinn, Montoya, Love, Curry, and Sievers, PA. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, welcome to the New Mexico Legal Lowdown podcast. We are trial lawyer or plaintiff lawyers talking about the civil justice system in New Mexico. The laws in New Mexico may be different from the laws in other states. The purpose of this podcast is to provide general information and to demystify the civil legal process in New Mexico. It is not a substitute for appropriate legal advice. In any individual case, please contact a lawyer if you want to talk about your particular case. Today, I am very excited to have Brian Colón from Singleton Schreiber with us as our very first guest. I've known Brian for over 25 years, and he's the perfect first guest. Hi, Brian.
Well, hey, Felice, it's great to be with you today.
I'm so happy. We're actually recording after hours, so hopefully I don't have my phone ringing or anything like that. And I bet it's hard for you to go longer than about an hour without your text coming in or your phone ringing or something like that.
Well, you absolutely have my undivided attention. I have been a fan and friend of yours for 28 years, and it's been a great journey. It's been awesome to watch you ascend to leadership in our New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association. It's been awesome to see you be a phenomenal advocate for your clients and to literally change the laws of New Mexico to better allow individuals to hold those who harm them accountable for their bad actions. And you've made New Mexico a better place. So I'm a fan, and I can't wait to see where this conversation goes.
You're embarrassing me. Thank you. You're so sweet. So tell our audience about you. First, what I want to know is, when did you decide that you wanted to become a lawyer?
You know, Felice, it's going to give your listeners a real insight into how unbelievable this mind is. And when I say unbelievable, I mean exceptionally weird. I was taken to an event when I was a young man. I was probably 13 or 12, and I had never met a lawyer in my life. But I went to this event, and this individual got up and gave remarks, and it just blew me away. Felice, as you know, I grew up in New Mexico like many New Mexicans, and quite frankly, most New Mexicans. I grew up in poverty, and I had a father and mother who were both disabled. My father, deteriorated before my very eyes when I was a teenager. He had muscular dystrophy and died at the young age of 49 when I was a teenager, and
wow.
It was really tough. But anyway, this individual gave some remarks that really inspired me. And I looked to the person who took me to the event, and I said, who is he and what does he do? Like, I was probably, like I said, 12 or 13. And he said, well, he's a lawyer. He's the Speaker of the House. And I said, well, I don't know what any of that means, but that's what I want to do.
That's awesome.
Because he inspired me to believe that there were people out there who were fighting for people like me that were on the margins. And I knew from that moment on that that's what I wanted to do. And fast forward a few years later, I had the privilege of being elected to Boys Nation from Boys State, which is a program held by the American Legion for about 50 years now. And I got elected to Boys Nation, and a reporter came out to my house. I'll never forget it. I say house, but it was my trailer in Bosque Farms, New Mexico. We'd moved up from Section 8 housing in Carson Park in Los Lunas over to a trailer in Bosque Farms. And the journalist came to my house because not too many people from Bosque Farms or Los Lunas, where I went to school, got to meet the President of the United States. And I was getting ready to go meet the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. And I share this to say that he, Slim Randalls, just like every good reporter who sits across from a teenager, their first question is, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I remember telling him, and it's actually written in the article, and I said, look, I want to be the first in my family to go to college. I want to get an accounting degree. I want to go to law school, and I want to serve the people of New Mexico in elected office.
I love that.
I was 17. And, as we are doing this interview today, the people of New Mexico allowed me to live that third part of the dream as I got 500,000 votes and served as state auditor. But I started out by living my dad's dream that I'd be the first in the family to go to college. I went to New Mexico State University from Las Vegas High School. I tell people I was on the tenure track at NMSU, but not for a professorship. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. But then I went straight to law school and graduated and started practicing. And yeah, I lived my dreams. I ran for office, I served, and this is kind of my bonus round. And I am in a place of abundance and enrichment and service in a way that I could have never imagined. Hopefully we could talk a little bit about that today, Felice. I think I answered your question.
That is so fantastic. And I think, why not now? Tell us a little bit about Singleton Schreiber and the kind of work they do.
Sure. I reflect. I'm here in my office in downtown Albuquerque, or in uptown Albuquerque. We have 4 offices in New Mexico. We're getting ready to open our 5th office in Farmington. We have an office in Las Cruces, Mora, Las Vegas, Albuquerque, and soon to be Farmington in the next couple of weeks. And when I think about what I'm doing now, I just cannot be anything except filled with gratitude. Kind of told you how I grew up, but on the way, I'm the same guy that had his car repossessed, didn't have a single blood relative in the whole state of New Mexico, and my friends let me sleep on their couch. Everything I owned, I carried in a black plastic trash bag from couch to couch. And community filled the gap for me in so many ways. I think why I'm so happy now, even having served and now in this bonus round of life, because I lived my dreams, this is the bonus. And this bonus round, I get to do what I've always wanted to do, which is serve others and repay my debt to the community that didn't allow me to fall through the cracks. And I should have, right? I just absolutely should have. I didn't have family to support my journey. I just had myself and my community. So I always tell Rafael, my son, who's now 28, I always say, I've got a debt I owe my community. I'll never be able to repay it fully, but I'm going to die trying. And Singleton Schreiber, New Mexico has allowed me to continue that repayment plan. Because I will tell you that when the founders of the firm kind of identified me and courted me to help them build their law firm in New Mexico, because we are national, we're in 8 states. We got about 120 lawyers, we got about 500 team members, and we're continuing to grow. And I just have the most amazing law partners. If you go to our website and check out our partners, it's the most beautiful collection of diverse leaders and experts in the law. Folks that have done billion-dollar, actions against companies like Johnson & Johnson for the talc case. People like Brett Schreiber, who was the first to take a case to trial against Elon Musk and Tesla and get nearly $250 million verdict. This is the first time.
That's amazing. I'm going to ask you more about that.
Yeah, no.
That's just incredible. But let's first finish talking about Singleton Schreiber.
Yeah, but this is where I get my energy, and this is why I'm inspired, because I am surrounded by phenomenal trial lawyers. I look around the table, and it's just amazing. I've got retired Marine colonels who are leading our litigation teams. I've got just so many wonderful people who all bring a positive attitude to the work we do, an attitude of gratitude and service. And there's an abundance mentality that says, we can do more, we can work harder, we can serve more communities. And that's what we do every day. We've got a strong appetite for service, and we do that through the law. We focus our practice on personal injury, single incident personal injury cases. So we do trucking cases, motorcycle collisions, car collisions, wrongful death, medical malpractice, product liability. But then we do big cases as well. So I represent several school districts in a big lawsuit against Facebook, Meta, Alphabet, the social media companies that knew that they were putting a product in the marketplace that was going to cause social media addiction in our children. They decided to put profits ahead of our children's safety. And I get to do that litigation for school districts all over New Mexico, small as Cuesta and as large as Las Cruces and hopefully Albuquerque Public Schools. And just, we get to be champions in big cases and small cases, but we like to really embrace the idea that we're client-centered. We always put the client in the center of every conversation that we have. And I like to say for New Mexico, I think I've proven it in the last 3 years, we are not just client-centered, but we're community-based. when Brett and Jerry came to talk to me about Singleton Schreiber and whether I'd be the managing partner to build out their firm, they didn't have an office yet. They'd come to New Mexico because we are wildfire experts.
We have our fair share of wildfires in New Mexico.
Yeah. Well, and we had our largest wildfire, in our history, 310,000 acres in northern New Mexico, the Hermit's Peak Canyon. So they had come out because of that to help the communities of northern New Mexico, but they hadn't built out an office. And they said, look, we want you to build this office to be a reflection of who you are. And I said, well, who do you think I am?
Yeah.
And I said, you're a passionate trial lawyer. You are someone who is deeply invested in community and philanthropy, and you are very engaged in the public policy landscape, or what some others might call politics. And if you're going to be a trial lawyer advocating for your clients, if you're not engaged in public policy, you can't serve them to your best potential. And I really believe that. And I think my colleagues in the law, like you, because I've seen you at the Roundhouse, volunteering your time to advocate for your clients' positions and to get good laws on the books in New Mexico. And so that's kind of our philosophy. We're client-centered, community-based. We love to support community organizations that are making a difference and lifting up New Mexico. But that's kind of the areas of practice that we have. I've got a dozen attorneys. We're one of the largest plaintiffs' law firms in New Mexico by number of attorneys. Got about 3 dozen team members all over the state. And I'm living in a place of abundance and service and filled with gratitude every day.
That is great. I know you were talking about the wildfire near Hermit's Peak. I've done the hike to Hermit's Peak when I was much younger. And I remember when that fire was happening, I know people in Las Vegas, and I was refreshing my computer for updates just to see, where that fire was going and who it was going to hit. And I was mesmerized. I could hardly get any work done.
It was tragic. It's like nothing New Mexico's ever seen before. And
Yeah.
and the heartbreak upon heartbreak is that, it was caused, the federal government lit the match. It was caused by the federal government's negligence, the admitted negligence of the federal government. And our federal delegation did a great job getting a set aside to try and compensate those communities of $5 billion. FEMA has done a very poor job of getting that allocation, those funds out to the communities. But, it was a historic feat by our federal delegation to get those funds allocated. FEMA has done a horrible job, I will just tell you. But we continue to advocate for those clients to make those communities whole. And it's an honor to do it. We do it all over the country, whether it's in Lahaina, where we have an office, in Hawaii, or whether it's in California, the Eaton Fire, or Texas, or Oregon, Washington. These are all states where we're representing victims of wildfires and holding big corporations and power companies, or in our case in New Mexico, in the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire, the federal government accountable for those negligent acts.
I've heard that a fire is just one of the most traumatic things that a person can go through. And the few people I've known who've experienced that say the most awful thing, and maybe it's a little bit different with modern technology, but, the loss of keepsakes and older photos, right? So maybe it depends on how old you are, but I can't imagine that it's any less traumatic for a young person to just lose anything that ever held value. It just sounds awful to have to rebuild life after something so devastating.
It really is. And all my attorneys, 120 of us or so, and all of our attorneys, and in New Mexico in particular, that work on the Hermit's Peak Canyon fire or the fire in Rio Doso, the McBride fire, look, we understand the gravity of the pain because a lot of our team members have been victims of wildfires. And then they come to work with us after we've advocated for them. They saw the work that we did. But we take it a step further, Elise, and this is, I'll talk about a lot of things I'm proud of for Singleton Schreiber, if you'll let me. But one of the things on point with what you just said is that as attorneys, and you do this too, Felice, because you represent, victims and nursing home atrocities and other, children and elders, and you're just at the center of a lot of pain as well as an attorney advocating for your clients. But we take it a step further. We literally have a mental health professional that's on our staff.
That's incredible.
It's unusual and it's awesome because we've now made all our attorneys go through trauma-informed advocacy. So
I love that.
It's really helpful because, you can try and be empathetic, but if you haven't lived it, all you can do is try, right? Because true empathy is really knowing what someone's going through and embracing that. Empathy light as I call it, is trying to listen and feel and understand and support. But our mental health professional helps guide us in that space, helps guide our clients to resources that they need for their own mental health because of what they've been through, which you described so beautifully, but it's so pain-centered. That trauma is real. Even if you didn't lose everything in your house, the idea that you had to process for hours, the idea of looking over your shoulder to see if your home is still there or if it stayed out of the burn scar or not. I mean, all of that is heavy duty trauma. And so,
And I love that for two reasons. I mean, on one hand, when people come to hire a lawyer, their legal issue is just generally just a part of their issue. On top of that, they may have financial issues relating to whatever traumatic thing happened to them. They may have emotional issues based on what happened to them. And I love that you have a mental health professional on staff to help your clients process and gain the strength or fortitude to continue with life, number one, but also to help your team understand where that client is coming from. Because at the end of the day, I think it's our job to tell our client stories in the best way we can. And the better a lawyer can tell their client's story, the better they are as a lawyer.
100%, Felicia. The only thing I would add as one more component of that is that you as a lawyer, Felice, me, you and I have both been doing this now. We're going to enter our 25th year of practice. And for a quarter of a century, we've been representing plaintiffs. And that means we carry their stories. It means we receive their stories in a way that comes with pain. We also need the tools to process our own transferred emotions that we receive when we're advocating for our clients. That's not something we all think about as often as we probably should, is our own mental health. I can't serve my clients if I'm not mentally in a good place. And if we don't recognize that there's transferred emotion, if we don't recognize that there is residual trauma that we receive by the emotions that we expend on investing in our client and their stories, then we're not taking care of ourselves, which means we're putting ourselves at risk for being in a position to be long-term advocates or even many more clients down the road. So I think there's like those three things, right? It's not for just our clients. It's not just so that we learn as lawyers how to treat our clients or receive our client stories, but it's also how do we process that in our own mental health? So it's kind of a three-legged stool that mental health professional has to sit on every day when it comes to delivering good service to us as a team and her as a mental health professional.
That is so important. I know, because it's not an easy job. Certainly it's not as glamorous as I envisioned before I got to law school or before I took the bar. I think my frame of reference was various TV shows, and I think the practice is a lot more grueling than I ever anticipated at times. It's frustrating, and I spend a lot more time in front of my computer and looking through documents. There's nothing really particularly glamorous about that. But it's okay because it's part of it and there's a goal. And I think that as long as we live in accordance with our values, that's the fuel that gets us through the difficult days.
100%.
Yeah.
And I just finished an hour and a half over at the law school on a panel talking to the students, the 1Ls, the first year law students, about lawyer life. And you're right, it's not always glamorous, but we're also in an enviable position to be able to do what makes us happy. If we don't like a particular area of law, we could pivot. But we've all chosen to be advocates for those who've been injured and those who are on the margins that don't have a voice and don't have the capacity to be their own advocates. For me, when you are client-centered, while I'm reading thousands of pages of discovery, I think of our clients. It's like my client doesn't have the capacity to go through this discovery. The end result of knowing that I'm serving them is so enriching and so fulfilling. And I think that's why, after 24, going into my 25th year of practice, I still love the law. I mean, I mentor a lot of young people into the law and young lawyers even, and even a few elder lawyers. But they're always amazed with how much I love our profession. But I also love people. And this profession, when it is client-centered, it is about people and their stories and helping put them in a stronger position than they were in when they walked in the front door. And there is not many professions where you can do that in so many different ways. If you want to write, if you want to be in the courtroom, if you want to make laws, it's such an incredible career. And I feel very honored to be able to call myself an attorney. I just really think that what we get to do is pretty sacred.
I agree. I have various times thought about other careers, and I keep coming back to this being really what I was probably born to do. I joke about taking other jobs, but I've never been serious about that. Anyway, one of the things that you and I talked about when we were getting ready for this is and I hope that this is a recurring theme with all the people who agree to be interviewed, is what are some of the things that we think that potential clients or the public in general, what would be helpful for them to know about what we do? And one of the things that I agree there's a ton of mystery around is how we pay for lawsuits. And we call them costs to differentiate that from the attorney fees. So let's talk about costs. How does Singleton Schreiber handle costs? Or let's talk about, what we think is the standard in the industry. I suspect everybody pretty much handles it the same way. When we do handle a plaintiff's case, we do a contingent fee agreement, which allows us and requires us, and the law permits us to basically fund a lawsuit. Is that how it works with your firm?
It is. I think it is a mystery. In fact, the first question after I sit down with somebody for intake, their concern is, well, how do I pay for this?
Right.
They don't get it. They're like, well, if you need an expert to talk about whether my procedure was done correctly, that's a lot of money. I can't afford to pay another doctor to come testify in court. I can't afford to pay for all these things you're calling depositions. I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds expensive. And
it is expensive.
And it is expensive.
Hundreds, thousands of dollars usually.
It is. And here's, part of my intake is always a very clear message. And I say, if you only remember one thing from this entire hour or hour and a half meeting, however long it takes, I want it to be this. You have one job. As the person who walked into my office, who's been involved in a car collision or been a victim of medical malpractice, you have one job. That is to heal. You have to do everything in your power to heal. I don't want you stressing about anything, and I don't want you doing anything that doesn't allow you to heal. I will take care of all the costs. I will advance those costs. So in other words, I will pay all those costs up front. And like you said, it's very often tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I will take care of all of that. You won't get a bill from me along the way, and you are not expected to pay that bill along the way. That is something that we do. Now, if we have a recovery for you, then we're going to take the fee that we get as your lawyer on that recovery, which is a percentage. And then I'm going to take those costs out that I have paid, which you have receipts for. I paid them. You get to see those. But sadly, there are sometimes when cases don't go as you expect them to.
I've been there.
Yeah. Well, and quite honestly, every case shouldn't go exactly where you expect it to go. Right?
Every case is a risk. I don't care what kind of case it is. Every case is a risk.
100% true. And I think that let's talk about medical malpractice cases for just a moment. When I've got somebody that comes in and tells me their journey through a procedure, and I have a whole nursing team for my firm. I've got 3 nurses that work with me, and they do a secondary review after I feel like there might be something here we need to look into. The nurses review an initial set of documents. And then we talk about what kind of experts would be required to prove up a medical malpractice case. And we proceed. The next step is I have to hire experts, and I have to pay those experts. Now, I don't pay those experts to tell me that there was medical malpractice. I pay those experts to tell me if there was medical malpractice.
Yeah.
And if they tell me there wasn't medical malpractice, then guess what? I'm not proceeding on that claim.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a doctor. I have to rely upon doctors to inform me whether or not there was a breach in the standard of care, which is a fancy way to say, did the doctor do what she or he was supposed to do? And if they didn't, under those circumstances, then I'm going to hold them accountable. But that doesn't happen 10 out of 10 times. So in that situation, I've now spent tens of thousands of dollars on experts trying to identify whether I have a medical malpractice case. And I promise you, I've never had a client that said, you know what, I've got an extra 25,000. Let me cover those costs, even though you're not going to pursue my claim. That's a cost that I have to observe. So there's a lot of overhead, and you have to be well financed to be able to do, in particular, medical malpractice cases.
Any medical case, first of all, medical records themselves can be expensive. I've received bills for medical records that are thousands of dollars, and that's okay. I expect that. Sometimes I will accept a case for the purpose of investigation because we don't know what happened. And I feel like my clients deserve answers. If nothing else, they deserve answers. They may not have a case, but sometimes we have to file for a personal representative to be able to have the authority to gather medical records. You can't do that without filing at least a petition to appoint a personal representative. And it's happened a ton of times that we gather records, spend hundreds or thousands of dollars. We like to kind of have some initial questions answered in-house and before sending them out. But it also depends on how busy we are. Sometimes we just send them out and we just say, here, you are a medical professional. Please tell us what you think about this case. And very often the answer is, well, yeah, this is a really sad story, but we can't point a finger at anyone. And then I think it's fine. And it's actually a relief for many people to hear, and I always say, listen, I'll give you your records. I don't feel comfortable pursuing this case as a business decision, but I feel like you're entitled to answers. And I hope it gives you a level of understanding that helps you find peace to know that a different medical professional reviewed the records and says that they did everything that they could and everything was appropriate. And this is it's a fluke or whatever. I think that allows people to heal too. And I think that that's valuable too. And I don't mind paying for that.
It's very valuable. But these are costs that people are looking at our industry or our profession. They don't contemplate some of those items that we don't get to recover because we choose to do this profession. And sometimes we make bad decisions.
Sure.
A claim that probably we shouldn't have, but we just wouldn't give up. And we wanted to push it all the way to the end. And it's expensive. And we absorb that. And look, I'm always clear when I have a medical malpractice intake. I say two things. One, it's not medical malpractice to have bad bedside manner. I appreciate and I can understand and I can actually empathize that this doctor was rude, inappropriate, etc. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to identify whether it was medical malpractice. The second thing I say is bad end results don't always equal medical malpractice.
That's true.
It's not medical malpractice to have a bad end result. There is a much deeper analysis that has to be done in order to determine whether there's medical malpractice. And those of us who do it, I'm thinking of my colleagues in our organization, your friends and mine. I know that they pursue far fewer cases than they do intake for because none of us are pursuing claims that we don't think have merit and that we don't have a basis from an expert that says you've had a breach in that standard of care we talked about. And
if you can't find an expert, at some point you get shut down.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, that's a long answer to your short question, but I do think it does provide kind of a look under the hood of what goes on for those of us that do those types of cases. They're very expensive, but we've all chosen to take the risk and invest in those types of cases because, quite honestly, we're the last stop for a lot of these people to find comfort in knowing that their loved one didn't die as a result of someone else being careless.
Yeah. And, there's that expense of hiring the experts and gathering the records. That's part of overhead, even when we decline a case. And, there are also the cases that we feel really strongly about that we have an expert to support and we still lose. Hopefully you haven't had to experience that, but I've been there.
It happened. It happens. But, it's such an incredible profession. I mean, yeah. I just can't say enough about how rewarding it is to be someone's champion and advocate.
Yeah.
New Mexicans, they deserve champions. And yeah. I think in many ways, the trial lawyers and the folks that do plaintiffs work in New Mexico, they're the champions of the people. They're the people's champ. they can be villainized for this reason or that. But at the end of the day, if you've had a loved one who you think might be a victim of medical malpractice, or you have a loved one that was in a motorcycle crash and is now a paraplegic, you want a champion. And that champion has to be a trial lawyer that's passionate about representing plaintiffs and putting them at the center of their story.
Yeah.
Amazing what we get to do.
We want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our Adobe Pillar supporters, Fadul, Clough, Hardy, and Conaway, LLC, Poulos and Coates, and Tani, Acosta, and Chaparro, PC. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury. Now, back to our conversation.
Now, the other topic that I think we both agree there's a lot of misinformation about is punitive damages. And when punitive damages are, when someone gets punitive damages, how often that happens. Tell me your perspective about punitive damages.
So often, whether it's my case against the social media companies, or it's a case against a company like Tesla or Elon Musk, one of the richest humans on the planet, if they've got behavior that is shocking and that is just outside kind of what somebody would think of regular negligence, the only thing that is only going to ever get them to change their behavior is something called punitive damages. And that means they're not only going to have to pay for the damages that individual plaintiff suffered, the jury is going to communicate to them that they are to be held accountable at a higher level, and it's something that is going to be material to that corporation. And what people don't usually know is that when a jury awards punitive damages, there are systems in place to make sure that the jury was appropriate in its award. Fun word called remittitor. And the judge gets to determine and evaluate that. And the courts in different jurisdictions have pontificated about what appropriate levels are for punitive damages on a given case. Some jurisdictions say that, look, if you have single-digit punitive damages, meaning they take the damages and use a multiplier of those damages to determine what the punitive damages are. And if that's a single digit, like if it's 9 times, if you injured me and it was $100,000 worth of damages I suffered, if you want to award punitive damages, if the acts were so egregious that you need to send a signal to that bad actor, generally speaking, if you have punitive damages that are awarded up to 9 times the damages I suffered, then that's going to be typically seen as reasonable. So I think that nobody really knows about those guardrails. No one talks about those guardrails. And there's one other thing I want to mention.
And the other thing, if I can just interject, is that, just because a plaintiff alleges punitive damages doesn't mean that the jury is even going to get to consider punitive damages. I think a lot of people, it's part of their forms or the templates or whatever, because you don't know there. And I always think about how cases evolve over time, as you gather more information and texture, and the case that you initially signed up, for the most part, they get more and more interesting. Occasionally there's a little, there's something that you don't expect, a wrinkle, but we have to take that into consideration. So I think a lot of people, just without knowing what the crystal ball will hold, will make that allegation. But in the at least in my experience, maybe I haven't been lucky enough to have one of these big wild cases, but in my experience, most judges will dismiss that out prior to trial. And it's really a rare and extraordinary case where the judge will allow a jury to even consider punitive damages.
No, that's an excellent point. And I think that's important to contemplate, and people should really understand, is that there are guardrails along the way, even before you get to the jury. So I think that's a point really well made. I'm glad you brought that up, Felice. The last thing I want to kind of point out about the process is that, let's be clear, when you're going up against a corporation like Tesla, or you're going up against a huge healthcare provider that has the ability to have 13 lawyers against you or me at plaintiff's table, and we get a jury to understand what our client went through, and they award a verdict, and it may have punitive damages in it. We win, right? We win for our client. We get that judge, we get that verdict. What happens now? I think there are some people that have this idea that there's a check waiting outside the courtroom door. Well, no.
Just the beginning of a whole other chapter.
It's the beginning of a whole other chapter, Felice. And I don't think
Right.
people understand that regardless of your verdict, and especially if it's got punitive damages, that means because you're typically dealing with a big corporation. That big corporation is going to appeal those damages and that award until the cows come home. And
Right.
I grew up in Valencia County. We got dairy down there. We got it down there. I know what that means. So then what ends up happening is you also have to talk and counsel your client about what that journey looks like, because they feel like they won. They've been vindicated. And if you don't prepare them, they may think it's over at that point. But as you say, it's just the next chapter. It's only just begun. And then, quite honestly, it goes through a very long appellate process. It takes a lot of time.
Years.
And that time, years. Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. Years. And in that time, negotiations are continuing to go on. And so the idea that I wish we had stats on this, but we don't. But it'd be very fascinating to know, these verdicts, how many of them get paid out in full and how many of them are actually negotiated down just because they have worn the injured family down. They have worn it down and they cannot wait any longer. They don't want to go through this anymore. So now there's an offer on the other side for much less than what the verdict was as deemed appropriate by their peers, and they take much less than what their peers said their case was worth. So there's a lot that goes on before you get to receive that compensation for your pain and for what you've been through from the time the jury issues its verdict to the time you actually collect those funds. So I don't know. It's easy to talk about, people who've been burned with scalding coffee without talking about what she and her daughter went through to have her recover. It's easy to talk about a big number. People fail to talk about what that family actually received.
Right.
And they fail to talk about what that family went through and how lives were changed and how the daughter, I think, if my recollection is correct, had to quit her job to take care of her mom because, if I remember right, she was burned, scalded so bad that she had her legs up just for her lower part of her body to be able to heal and didn't have mobility. And nobody talks about any of that. They just want to talk about a hot cup of coffee and how much money that jury awarded. It's so unfair. And I'll just close with this. At some point, I think all of us should be able to put our trust in the civil justice system that is based in having our peers determine whether or not we should be compensated for what we've been through. And many times our peers say we should not be compensated.
For better or worse, they sure do.
That's right.
I mean, it's one of, I think about how much people hate to show up for jury duty, but it's one of the most, it's certainly an equal branch of government, but it's so important. And aside from showing up to vote on election day or if you go for early voting, it is one of the most direct ways to be involved in government and applying the law, because what good is a law if you don't have someone enforcing it? And we're part of that enforcement process, and the jury is also part of that enforcement and interpretation process. And I just wish, I know it's hard on working people who have families to support, but I wish more people would show up for jury duty and really take that seriously, because I think that when jurors do that, I think they know how important it is. It is so important. And they really get to make those decisions as a group. But, we benefit from the collective experience of peers in the community who don't have specialized training or anything like that. It's quite beautiful, I think.
No, it really is. And it's rare that you get in front of a jury, because it's rare that it is in your client's best interest to go all the way through that process, because typically we're advancing claims that are appropriate, where somebody was negligent. And so that means the defense of that individual or that corporation is typically going to counsel their client that they're going to have to pay. And as it gets closer to trial, a lot of times that's what happens. The vast majority of the time, that's what happens. Now, does that put your client in a position where they've been, quote unquote, made whole? Probably not. But typically our clients believe that being able to put it behind them and to bring closure and the time value of money, to be able to put that to rest and put it to bed is often worth being made somewhat whole and not getting to tell their story in front of a jury. And it's a system that is pretty amazing and for the most part works.
For the most part, I know people are disappointed all the time, but it's the best system we have, and I can't think of a better system. I want to give you more time to talk about philanthropy and your mentorship, and then I have another fun question for you. So tell me about your community service.
We kind of are landing where we started, which is, I really try and live a life of gratitude and service. I should not be here. Like, I'm sitting here on the 6th floor in uptown Albuquerque, working for a firm that is just filled with fearless advocates. Even I, in as positive a space as I almost always am, my partners will come to me and say, well, we really ought to do this. And I'll give you a perfect example real quick, which is, they said, we don't think it's fair that the victims of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire should have to pay gross receipts tax on the attorney's fees they're paying. They shouldn't have to do that. There's no way that governmental entities should profit from their tragedy. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, I just think the legislature is probably not interested in doing a Swiss cheese approach to their tax policy. I said, it's probably, why would they want to do that? They start creating an exception here, an exception there. And I'll just never forget Jerry Singleton looking me in the eye. We were together. And he just said, well, not with that attitude, they won't. And I said, okay, I'll go try. And we tried. And you know what? The New Mexico legislature agreed and said, for this in particular, governmental entities shouldn't profit on the tragedy of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire. And we are not going to apply gross receipts tax to those.
Wow. I was not familiar with that.
Very few people are. But that's Jerry Singleton. And
wow.
It cost me time, it cost me money, it cost me a lot to get that for our clients. And as you know, Felice, none of that comes to the attorney. That was strictly 100% for the benefit of the victims of the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire. And this is what I get to do. I get to invest my firm's resources in being a champion for our clients, even when it's not in our own financial interest to do so. And I'm inspired by that kind of leadership. I'm inspired by the fact that they love that I'm a life member of the NAACP. They love that, I'm on the board for the New Mexico Hispanic Bar Association. First couple of years I was partner here. And they love the community engagement, whether it's the National Hispanic Cultural Center or Encuentro New Mexico or Enlace Comunitario or the Grief Center of New Mexico or for those that know me, they know that I serve on all these boards. Like I'm addicted to serving in our philanthropic community. I don't like to call it a nonprofit. I like to call them social profits because they lift up community. They help provide that social safety net for those in our community that need support. And they empower me to make that investment. And they empower me to do that work, whether it's with the New Mexico Dream Center, where we are investors in their work. I am typically the MC or the auctioneer for their annual breakfast. But we have an entire division in our firm that is being just unbelievable when it comes to this novel approach, but we are advocating for victims of sexual and human trafficking in this country and holding hoteliers and their franchisors to account for that work. And
wow.
At the Mexico Dream Center, they're kind of the clearinghouse for those victims. So I've been leaning into that Dream Center for 10 years now.
I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on that.
We could. And it is fascinating. And the courts have been awesome so far about saying, look, Acor, look, those who own the Red Roof Inn, I can't think of the parent company of Red Roof, we are not going to allow you to shirk responsibility and just say, well, we had no idea it was our franchisee who was allowing that activity to go on. We didn't know. Oh, really? Aren't you supposed to be doing annual inspections of your property? You are furthering your business interest. You're staying in this lawsuit, at least for now. And I've got incredible champions that are doing that work nationally.
Wow.
And then I got like Pilar here in my office and Marissa down in Las Cruces, former just Cracker Jane, assistant U.S. attorney that has come on with my firm. They're really filling that space in New Mexico as we advocate for victims of sexual and human trafficking. And we're very inspired by the fact that our legislature wants to have a Truth and Justice Committee and task force on really getting to the bottom of what happened with the Epstein case and what happened at the Epstein Ranch, the Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. And we're empowering them and we're applauding those legislators for doing that because it's not necessarily a profit center for us, but it's a passion point. And, we take some cases because we got to keep the lights on. So we take some cases for profit, some cases because they're just righteous cases and it's the right thing to do. And other cases just because somebody's done something that really pisses us off.
I love it. That's kind of my business model too, is, there are the cases that kind of make sure everybody can put food on the table. And then there are the cases that are just the right thing to do. And without, the pro bono, I try to be very discriminating about the pro bono, but I do a fair amount and it just has to move me. And sometimes it is the right thing to do.
Well, let me, I told you I was going to pepper through some of the things that inspired me about being a partner and the managing partner for New Mexico's operation of Singleton Schreiber. You hit on it right there. So we are 3-0 against this administration's ICE activity. 3-0, 3 habeas cases, 3 releases. And for listeners that don't know what a habeas case is, it means somebody's wrongfully detained. And quite frankly, they don't have access to justice. They don't have access to attorneys. And we are a collaborating and cooperating attorney with the ACLU. And then we're getting other cases. We're doing a case now where ICE came in and shot a family's dog. Just awful. But we're 3-0 against the administration, doing those cases pro bono. And we think that the immigrant population, the mixed status families in America right now need as much support as we possibly can give them in this climate. And do you know what we did?
Such important work. Tell me.
You're not going to believe this. Are you ready?
Yes.
In 3 weeks, starting on December 1st, we have hired a full-time immigration law expert that will do nothing but pro bono work 100% of the time.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And this leader was like the leader of the ABA's immigration section at the national level. And she's now coming on to Singleton Schreiber for the sole purpose of being a champion for our immigrants in America, a champion for those homes that are mixed status, a champion in pushing back against this administration's incredibly inappropriate and unjust and unlawful treatment of our community, family, friends, and neighbors. And I am so proud
important work.
So proud of it. So proud.
I'm proud of you too. Okay, here, time for our fun question. Tell me, what is either your favorite meal, a New Mexican meal, or your favorite place to go for like a weekend vacation in New Mexico?
I'm a total foodie and I eat out all the time. It is, my car has 150,000 miles on it. My house is the same 1,900 square feet from 24 years ago. My wife's car has a couple 100,000 miles on it. I don't spend money, but I do eat out a lot. So I
do too.
My favorite meal?
Yeah.
My favorite meal is probably going to be my chicharrón and eggs over at Barelas.
Oh my God.
They already know me in there. I want a crispy tortilla, crispy hash browns, green chili, sunny side up eggs, and chicharrones, and I am ready to go. And, I will tell I always tell Mike, I said, Mike, I always order my eggs sunny side up, but I also know that it's just a suggestion because whatever your mera cocineras back there want to serve me, I'm going to love it anyway.
That's right.
Just send it out. I'm going to eat it. And I'm going to love it. So that's probably my favorite meal out.
Thank you so much, Brian. It has truly been a pleasure to chat with you. I always enjoy talking to you. I hope we can do it again. And please send my best to Aleli.
100%. I will do that. And thank you for being the awesome leader that you are in our wonderful profession of serving others and centering our clients and being their advocates and their voice when they don't have one. And when I think about my favorite trial lawyers who are real champions for community, you're in that group, Feliz Rael, and I'm grateful for you.
Aw, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.
Before we wrap up, we want to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the New Mexico Trial Lawyers Association Alliance for Justice. We want to thank our Chili Circle supporters, the Tracy Law Firm, and Curtis & Company. Through their generous investments, they're safeguarding New Mexicans' right to access justice and a jury.
Thanks for joining us on New Mexico Legal Lowdown. If today's conversation changed how you see the legal system, share it with a friend. We'll be back next time with another trial lawyer fighting for New Mexicans. Produced and powered by LawPods.